two really life-changing events happening so close in time in my life made me realize that when I got home from Afghanistan, that I needed to take a very active role in ensuring that North Carolina, that America, that the planet was a place where I could feel good about raising my daughter. And I believe that elective office, and still believe that elective office was one of the best, if not the best ways to do that.
My name is Jonny Ball, and I'm the founder of Campaign Force, a not-for-profit that inspires, trains, and coaches the armed forces community to stand up and serve again. I've served on the front line of military operations, and in civilian life, the front line of UK politics. This Veterans in Politics podcast is a set of interviews brought to you by Campaign Force and sets out to explore how the military community can help make our politics a better place. I lean into my little black book of contacts and sit down with individuals from across the world of politics, sharing secrets, giving tips and advice, and inspiring the next generation. We are Campaign Force. This is the Veterans in Politics podcast. Let's introduce you to our guest.
This episode features our very first guest from the US, Representative Grier Martin. Grier is a veteran of Afghanistan serving in the US Airborne, a calling that came after 9/11. It was this formative experience that inspired Grier into politics, where he serves in the North Carolina State Legislature. In this episode, Grier also records leaving behind his family to go to war and how his daughter is his driver for a better world. It's time for you to meet our guest.
I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Grier Martin from the US, our first international veteran in politics. How are you, sir? Great to see you again. How are you today?
Jonny, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for having me. Doing great here.
Well, it's an absolute delight, and I've always dreamt of actually speaking to someone, one of our allies, and it just seemed a natural starting point with our good friends in the US. But as I've already mentioned, Grier, you have a military background. Naturally, that's what binds us together, not just as allies, but in terms of our own service. And we've chatted about that in a previous call. But can you just tell us a little bit about your military service?
Sure. I did, when I was at university, participated in the Reserve Officers Training Corps, ROTC, which I think is similar to the OTC that you have in the UK, and was commissioned into the reserve component as a field artillery officer, and spent my first few years in the reserves as an artillery officer, as a fire support team leader, and was probably not the world's worst artilleryman, but was certainly one of the worst out there, but struggled along for a few years, firing misguided rounds downrange. This was back in 91, 92, just after Desert Storm. And after a few years of doing that, my commitment was coming to an end, but decided that I did want to continue serving, but in the interim had gone off to get my law degree also, and thought that I might be less useless as a judge advocate, as a military lawyer, than I had been as an artilleryman. So switched branches from field artillery to the Judge Advocate General's Corps. That would have been about 1999 or thereabouts. And of course, in just a few years, September 11th, the attacks occurred. And like I think a lot of folks in the reserve component, immediately volunteered for active duty. The American military, being the huge bureaucracy that it is, it took a few months for Uncle Sam to take me up on my offer, but mobilized active duty and went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which is the home of the Airborne and Special Operations Forces. So the highest speed, most exciting post in the American military, I think, but conveniently for me, just happened to be an hour and a half down the road from where I live in North Carolina. So I was able to come home on the weekends and see my wife. After being there for a few months, found out that my wife was pregnant with our first child. And then soon after that, found out that I was going to be deployed to Afghanistan. So my daughter was born in November. 6 days after that, shipped out for Afghanistan. with 18th Airborne Corps, which is the main unit at Fort Bragg, the parent unit for the 82nd Airborne Division, 101st Airborne, 3rd Infantry Division, and the 10th Mountain Division. And went over to Afghanistan to Bagram for part of OEF 3, the third rotation of the Enduring Freedom rotations that the U.S. Was doing. So that would have been, I think, November of 2002. So it was in that lull after the initial hostilities had settled down, that the Taliban had been mostly pushed back, and it was before their subsequent resurgence. So I don't think there's ever been a peaceful time to be in Afghanistan by any means, but certainly this was a less dangerous time to be there, and was there until mid 2003. While I was over there, did a variety of things. My main job was to do what we would call foreign claims. So that when the 82nd Airborne Division paratroopers were out there breaking things, my job was sort of to follow in their wake to whatever remote village they'd been in, and investigate any claims that the Afghans had made for reimbursement to the damage that my fellow paratroopers had done, adjudicate the claim, and if necessary, pay the money for it. So I had this very romantic image of what my job was, that I was, if you envision in some cheesy Clint Eastwood Western movie where he plays sort of a roving circuit court judge traveling on horseback through dangerous parts of the Wild West to dispense justice with a rifle and a box of cash. That's what I was doing in Afghanistan. So when I've explained that romantic vision to most folks, they said, "Oh yeah, you were an insurance claims adjuster." Not quite as romantic as Clint Eastwood going through the Wild West, but probably much closer to the truth of what I actually was doing. Then beyond that, also was able on the side to help soldiers with their variety of legal issues, and then also advise commanders on operational law. Essentially the law, what the law says about who you can blow up and what weapons you can use to blow them up with. Came home and then have spent the rest of the time in the reserve component, other than a few mobilizations for active duty. Spent most of my time since then at Fort Bragg still as a judge advocate with Army Special Operations Command and Army Special Forces Command. And am now at the very, very tail end of my career. As we speak, I am probably about 10 months out from being retired, essentially due to old age.
Oh, well, as they say here in the UK, you must have had an easy paper round because you look good on it. That's all I can say. And it's really weird because I also ran claims clinics in Afghanistan.
No kidding.
Yeah. So I know what it was like to go around with bags of cash and on the serious side, obviously those kind of battle damage incidents. And then
Right.
on the slightly more humorous sides, when Afghans would come in with evidence of the claims they wish to make against the ISAF forces, and
Right.
you're giggling because you probably came across these stories as well. But I think the best one for me was a story by British troops telling me about this dog who'd attacked them in this village, very ferocious dog, and then it resulted in an incident involving where sadly the dog is no longer with us. And the owner came in ferocious about this incident and wanted to claim, quite rightly, against his loss, and showed me a picture of the dog. And it can only be described as the size of a chihuahua. So it wasn't the Afghans exaggerating on that occasion. It was very much the British troops telling me about how ferocious and dangerous this dog was. But I'm sure it was frightening for the troops at the time. But then, so running parallel with that, a bit like me actually, has been this political career. And you are within the state legislature. Can you educate us over here in the UK a little bit more about that form of government, its function, and how that relates to the politics in the US that we'll be more familiar with?
Sure. And so we'll have to rewind a little bit all the way back to 1776. I'll start there, and should only take me a few hours to work my way up to,
I can't believe we're getting
2020.
lectured by history by a US.
So in America, we have a strong federal system where our states have a great deal of power with regard to the federal government. And throughout our history, there's been a very healthy tension between the federal government and the state governments as to who has responsibility for a particular area. And that's been healthy for our system. It is not really, though, all that different from the system that seems to be evolving, or rather, I guess devolving would be the appropriate verb, in the United Kingdom, where Scotland has a great deal of autonomy within the broader United Kingdom, Northern Ireland and Wales also. And so really the closest analog to my job probably is as a member of the Scottish Parliament, and that we're a subnational assembly that has a great deal of control over every aspect of what goes on in our state, really with the exception of foreign policy and defense. There in the states, it tends to be a little more. There are so many areas that both the federal government and state governments have a significant role. Transportation, for example, North Carolina has a large state road network, but we also have federal interstate highways that run through. The same is true in criminal law, agriculture, education, so many other things. So there's often less of a clear division between what's a state responsibility versus what's federal, as opposed to how much influence each respective level has. But yeah, the easiest way to explain it is I'm essentially a member of the Scottish Parliament, equivalent of that. And in fact, North Carolina is roughly, well, I guess if you combined Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, North Carolina is about the same in population as all those combined, and about the same in geography as those combined also. So that's about what I do, and saves me having to explain the full history of federalism in the United States from the creation of the Constitution in 1789.
That's a good.
You would put your listeners to sleep mighty fast.
Well, no, we have touched on devolved government in previous episodes and previous seasons, so it's a really good I can't even say the word. Here we go. Analogy, there we go, for us to actually look at and compare and contrast. But I think you're completely right in how you described that, and that link to Scotland is a good one. But but why did you get involved in politics in the first place? It's a question I ask absolutely everyone, because I'm completely fascinated by why people put their head above the parapet. What have you set out to achieve? Have you achieved that yet? And what do you hope to achieve for the future?
Yeah, gosh, a lot of questions there. The immediately answer about why did I get into politics? And I think I'd always been exposed to politics. My father had been engaged in politics, but I was quite certain that I never wanted to run for office myself. But as I mentioned, my daughter, my only child, was born 6 days before I left for Afghanistan. And so I went from having very few real responsibilities on this planet to all of a sudden being responsible for ensuring that I raised my child in a state and a nation, in a world where she could be safe, where she could be educated, and where she could prosper. And then just a week later, landing in Afghanistan, a country where certainly the Afghans, a father in Afghanistan, can't say that he's providing that sort of environment for his son or daughter. And so those two really life-changing events happening so close in time in my life made me realize that when I got home from Afghanistan, that I needed to take a very active role in ensuring that North Carolina, that America, that the planet was a place where I could feel good about raising my daughter. And I believe that elective office, and still believe that elective office, was one of the best, if not the best, ways to do that. So a very sort of abstract duty, high-minded sentiment there. But once I'd made that decision, then went through the very cold-blooded, data-driven process of figuring out where I could get myself elected. And the state legislature seemed to be a place. I found an opportunity there, a seat that was not an open seat, but one that I thought I could win. And I felt that the state legislature, because of the system we have in the United States, where the states have significant influence, was a great place to really make a big difference. You asked me what my goals were, what I hope to achieve in office, and I can't say that I had specific policy aims. I didn't show, and that was by design. I didn't have a specific set of a specific agenda that I wanted to achieve. Instead, it was more broadly focused on education. Uh, Again, all wrapped around my daughter. Could he get a good education in North Carolina? Would she have clean air to breathe and safe water to drink? Would she be able to get a good paying job to support her family going forward? Those are the sort of things. And I can say that North Carolina is a great place to raise a child now. I've had a role in that as part of a great team. We've got a long way to go. We face a lot of challenges, so the work will never be done. My goals will never be, I think, fully achieved.
Wow. And you've been doing this for
much like arguably the 2-decade mission in Afghanistan, but hopefully with a more optimistic outlook.
It sounds to me that having that drive to serve, which is obviously evident within your military service, and you see that with your colleagues as well. So I'm told there are a lot of veterans serving alongside you. Am I right?
Yeah, we do have a pretty good amount. North Carolina, because of the presence of Fort Bragg, which is the largest in terms of personnel installation in the United States, and certainly the main installation in the United States Army, and then Camp Lejeune, which is one of the largest installations in our Marine Corps, and an Air Force base and a few other installations, has a strong veterans population. So that translates into a pretty good percentage of veterans in office. We still it needs to be higher, but I've been pleased to serve with a lot of veterans from both political parties. And of course, in the States, we, for the most part, have just two political parties. My libertarian friends and folks in our other small parties would disagree, but we're essentially a two-party system in contrast to what you have in the UK. And I've found that our shared military background really serves as a unifying force in the face of some pretty significant policy disputes. So some of the best friends I've made in the General Assembly I'm a Democrat. Some of my best friends are Republicans who are also veterans. We show up and we'll fight over our policy differences, but someone who stepped up to serve our country, my default view of them is that they're here in the General Assembly for the same reasons they served in the military, to be a part of something bigger than themselves, to serve others, that they're not here for glory or fame or anything else of the sort. Not that those things are to be found in abundance in the North Carolina General Assembly, but they're at least in small doses. And we understand each other, we trust each other, and that allows us to work together in ways that are much more difficult, I think, for members of the General Assembly who have not served in the military.
That's so fascinating to hear that experience from you, because that's certainly been what I've seen here in the UK. In the UK Parliament, for example, this was something I explored with Tom Tugendhat and his debate over the Overseas Operations Bill, which has been a big piece of legislature going through UK Parliament, and his interaction with Dan Jarvis on the opposite side of the chamber. And the fact that they'd actually served together in Afghanistan, been out on the ground together. Wow. And there's a quite dubious picture of them out in the desert with some dodgy haircuts. But the commonality in that bond of service, they disagree ferociously around sort of ideological things. But the way in which they converse and work together and respect each other based on that shared service is really quite powerful. And I've been really fascinated to see what your experience has been over in the US too. And it's really refreshing to hear that from you, that certainly seems to be the case too. But there are some similarities, it would seem, between the UK and the US about across the whole veteran space. But do you think there are differences too, or what are those similarities, and what are those differences as you see them from over in the US, would you say, around the veterans community?
Yeah, this is an issue that I think that has seen a lot of evolution post 9/11. as both of our countries have been heavily engaged in Afghanistan and Iraq. I don't think I need to go back to 1776 for this, but at least going back to probably post World War I in the States, our nation did, and particularly post World War II, invested heavily in our veterans, in their health care, in their education, in helping them purchase a home, a whole series of programs to benefit them, to care for them. And my sense is that the UK, at the governmental level, did not reach those heights. And a lot of my education on this comes from my engagement with Jim Cameron at Mission Motorsport.
Good old Jim.
And I think that the sense I got from the time I've spent in the UK interacting with veterans over there is that immediately post 9/11, the government was probably not as engaged, certainly as many UK veterans hoped they would be, and in comparison to the United States, was not as engaged in helping veterans. But one of the things, not as engaged as the United States Veterans Administration has been, but one of the things that blew me away in the UK was how private philanthropy stepped up with Help for Heroes and a whole host of other nonprofit organizations. Were doing things at a level unseen in the United States, to go visit Tedworth House, an old stately home and officers' mess that had been converted into a recovery center, and just a lovely part of your country in just a beautiful environment with incredible facilities for rehabilitation, for exercise, a caring staff, fully resourced, mostly through philanthropy. And there's nothing going on at that level in the States. As I observe from across the Atlantic, it does seem that the UK government is stepping up its care for veterans. Certainly, the creation of the minister's position that Jonny Mercer filled does seem to have raised the veterans' portfolio to a higher level. And I do think certainly philanthropy has stepped up in the United States too. So ideally, we're both at a place in our countries where the government and the private sector are doing what they need to do. My concern, of course, is that if hostilities have wound down in Iraq and Afghanistan, that the groundswell support that we've seen in both countries diminishes. The public's there are plenty of other problems that both of our countries are facing beyond just wars and taking care of our veterans, and the public's attention is going to be diverted by those things. And fortunately, without more veterans being injured physically and mentally, or just reintegrating into civilian society, that we're going to have a hard time keeping government and the private sector focused on what they need to be doing for our veterans. And I don't know what the answer to that is. But I know at least part of that answer does involve veterans stepping up to serve in government. It won't happen without that happening.
You're not going to hear me disagree with you on that point. But absolutely.
I thought I'd get an amen on that one.
Thank you very much. But yeah, absolutely. Having more veterans in positions of leadership in our communities, from local government right up to national government, is really important to make sure that we do keep this in the consciousness of those decision makers. I also think that the recent times that we've lived in during COVID-19, here in the UK, we've actually seen the armed forces visible in our communities again for so many years, because of the homeland security threat from Irish republicanism, and because of the increased Islamic domestic terrorism threat and other domestic threats as well. The armed forces were increasingly invisible in our communities, but all of a sudden the armed forces has been seen doing COVID-19 tests in car parks of supermarkets, going to door to support local authorities, battling COVID on a local level. And I think the public here in the UK have understood the personalities behind the armed forces and their relationships improved. But I completely agree in that narrative, as you've explained, that understanding was there. It was clear during Afghan Iraq. We understood the armed forces. They got us. And there is this danger that what we call the Help for Heroes effect dwindles away as it becomes less and less visible in the media. So I actually think there's probably, it seems to me that we've got some things right here in the UK, and we forever look across the pond and think that you are the shining light of veterans affairs, and indeed that's true in many cases. But I think somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic there is a solution about how we broach this going forward. So it's really
absolutely. Our countries are so similar and obviously have a common history. That if we're not learning from each other on how to care for our veterans, we're falling down on the job.
Definitely, I think that's probably one of the first tests, in fact. And but that's how we can come together. But there are obviously lots of things that divide us at the moment within our politics. But we've seen that played out in public here in the UK. We've seen it famously in the US too. I mean, is that a fair commentary that politics is divided in the US, and how's that having an impact on democracy and political participation more widely in the US, would you say?
Yeah, we're as divided as I've ever seen, not just in my 15-year political career, but in my 52 years of life. Now, I was not quite born, I guess, in most of 1968 when there was a lot of turmoil in the United States, but certainly since then, this is far and away the most divided we've ever been. I think that's been going on, that's existed for a while under the surface, and then certainly through the Trump presidency, but then particularly with the events of January 6th, with the insurrection at our Capitol, that made it very clear, the deep divisions in American society. Obviously looking at the UK, where you've got Scotland potentially again looking to become independent, and other divisions. You've, at least as I look at it, the most prominent divisions are geographic, recognizing that geography is sometimes a proxy for other divides. In the United States, it's not as geographic, and it's more purely ideological, and that there are two very different viewpoints on what America's future should look like, what America's identity is. And I'm not sure how we resolve that at all. But again, one path towards that is a common sense of shared experiences that you get in the military. There's other endeavors in society to gain that shared set of experiences. But for me, the military has far and away been the place to get that, where I'm working together as a North Carolinian with, someone whose accent I can barely understand, a Yankee from New York, and we're both tasked to go through an obstacle course together or accomplish some other mission. Someone whose last name I can barely pronounce, whose parents immigrated from a country I've never heard of, and who's never been exposed to someone like me with a Southern accent, who can barely understand me. Me as a Democrat, having to solve a problem with a very, very conservative Republican. That's the sort of thing that will be a part of whatever the solution looks like for my country, and probably for yours also. What is my assessment right on attributing geography to the source of the most obvious divisions in the UK?
I think it is certainly a base of some divisions in the UK, particularly when we talk about the intra-nationalist debate. I've been reliably informed, has never gone away. It's always been there subsurface and comes to prominence at different times, depending on who's got the loudest voice at the moment. We happen to have a very loud voice on certain elements of that devolved government debate at the moment. But I think actually we're seeing really interesting things happen in UK politics at the moment, where traditional areas of support that it might have been attributed to Labour or the Conservatives in the past are defying the odds. So we've seen the Red Wall, famously in the north of England, where ordinarily the Labour Party would have just walked it. We're now seeing these by-elections happening where the Conservatives are gaining seats. Likewise, we're seeing down in the south of England where, again, the Conservatives would have ordinarily put up a candidate and not worried about campaigning because it was a shoo-in. we're seeing them lose seats or huge amounts of vote share as well in local elections. So it's really interesting. It's all kind of up for grabs at the moment, but there is this kind of divisiveness. It's certainly polarized. And it's funny you should reference point the 60s, because for me, as someone that is a political geek, I've really reached back to that moment to look for some answers and to be inspired by the likes of Bobby Kennedy and what he did at that time to bring people together at a boiling point of political history. Do you think we have those figures in our politics globally or nationally? Are we waiting for the next Bobby Kennedy? Is that possible, do you think?
They're out there, and certainly we need to look for them and support them where we can. I am cautious, though, about looking for the solution to our problems in individuals, in personalities. That there is certainly potential there for positive change, but there's also potential for demagoguery, for dictatorship, for cults of personality, and that sort of thing. And, true for across the political spectrum on that. So we need to be looking for leaders of substance, of proven substance, and leaders who have the ability to bring us together. But we can't expect just one great person to do that for us. I'm a huge fan of President Barack Obama. I think one of the very best presidents we've had of the past century, and was had the personality to be someone who could unify our country. But even he is not someone who could solve all our problems, and we can't expect him to. We need to again, to identify those folks and support them, but also equip them with a Congress, equip them with a parliament, with a bureaucracy made up of men and women with a shared ethic of service and shared competence to help get the job done.
I was going to say, perhaps you've already answered our question to that problem. It's about the movement and that kind of cross-party movement that we have potentially through veteran participation cross-party. I was having a conversation with a friend the other day about this, and I said, well, what we need to do, and it's a dirty word, but create an insurgency. We've spent so many decades countering insurgencies, and some of the most nastiest, cruelest insurgencies that we've ever seen. But actually, insurgency potentially could be a positive thing. And that's not about setting up new political parties. It's about looking at democracy, looking at the establishment, and seeing how we can actually get people in there. This insurgency of people with shared values, shared purpose, shared skills, who can actually change things for the better from within. And I think that's probably the best approach, rather than kind of some fringe movement that never seems to be able to gain traction anyway.
Yeah. Goodness. Both our countries have incredible democracies, which arise from the same root. Our American democracy is certainly an offshoot of British democracy. We've obviously made some pretty significant changes post 1776 to it, but it's what we've got has survived the test of time, and we don't need revolution. We don't need wholesale change, but at the same time, some pretty glaring flaws in both our systems are showing up. And we need to both look at the systemic changes that need to be made, the procedural changes that need to be made, but then also what personnel changes we need to make.
So in getting some of those personnel changes, we need to speak to our veterans community and get them to stand up and serve again, as I say. So on that, before we close out today, I've loved this chat, and no doubt we're going to talk again and again in the future. But what would you say to a UK or US veteran sat there listening to this podcast today, out on a run, walking the dog, or just going about their daily life listening into this show, what would you say to them to inspire them to stand up and serve again?
First of all, I'd say good for being out there on a run. It's important to keep your PT up, keep your phys up, and stay in shape, particularly for us folks in the reserve component too, Jonny. But with regard to politics, I would say first of all, don't be scared of politics, and don't be turned off by politics. One of the great things I think about the military mentality is no matter how much we're frustrated by military life, how much we may be upset or dislike our fellow soldiers, if we're given a mission, we're going to drop all that and we're going to go out there and accomplish the freaking mission. It's going to get done. And we know that the soldier next to us is going to have the same mentality. They're there to get the job done, and we can trust in that. And that's very satisfying, and we get used to that. Politics is not always that way. There are people in there advancing personal agendas. There's people in politics advancing selfish economic agendas, advancing their party's agenda over the country's agenda. And that understandably turns many people off, particularly veterans who come from an environment where that's anathema. And I would say to veterans that that's not something they should be repelled by. That's just something that they need to view as yet another, albeit more difficult challenge than many things that they've faced in the military. And that their demonstrated record of service to something greater than themselves is exactly what's needed in politics to address that very problem. That they're needed more than ever to step up and serve in this capacity. So get involved in politics for all the right reasons that you stepped up to serve your country. At the same time, though, one thing I do see many veterans do in the States, and it's probably something that you see too, is that they're inspired for the same reasons they enlisted in the military to step up and serve their country and run for office. But the thing they forget from military life, where in military life, we joke that in the American military, you don't go to the latrine without drafting a 5-paragraph operations order. I mean, you plan it,
Same.
Whatever you're going to do. And yet when veterans leave the military and they decide to run for office, they said, all right, I'm going to go do good in the world, and then go down and pick an office to file for without doing the research on, is this the right target? If it is, can I successfully attack this target? And doing the same level of analysis and planning that they would do for a military operation. Bring that from the military over to politics. Find an office where you have a chance to win. Doesn't mean a 50-50 chance to win or a 90% chance to win. It may be only a 20% chance to win. Whatever it is, make sure you've given the numbers a good look. Salt the advice of those like you, Jonny, who do this for a living, who can give a realistic analysis on the odds of winning and help you draft a good plan to do it, and then go about doing it. So keep your idealism, but be very data-driven in picking the office you want to run for and in conducting your campaign for office.
That's sound advice, comprehensive. Grier, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And we'll see you again sometime.
I look forward to it. Jonny, thanks for having me on, and thanks for all you're doing to get our fellow veterans to step up and serve in office.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. If you've been inspired by Grier's story today, then head over to campaignforce.co.uk, where you can check out our many events, from our introductory insight workshop, which is completely free of charge, to our many mission-specific training events. Book on today and use this as your moment to stand up and serve again. Thanks to our guests, and thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now. Alternatively, you can support our mission by checking out in the show notes below, where you can rate, donate, or become our mate. Thank you.